Let's start off talking about debt and where we are now. We're heading towards now the government has published its budget estimates, etc. And the finance bill, where is it at precisely? Has it been? Sorry, I've been out of. Where are we in that process, and what do we need to be worried about, especially in view of a broad-based government? So the government now feels probably comfortable to do a lot of the things which it was nervous about doing last year. If you could perhaps tell us a bit and how we come into such deep debt that there are doubts that we can even repay it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gladwell, and I'm grateful to ICJ for this invitation. And allow me to go a step back, because there was that question, how can we turborize the movement? And one thing I would like to say is that we need a lot of consistency when it comes to citizen engagement in fiscal policies and management. I'm saying this because I want to start by asking, why are we waiting for June for us to demonstrate? Because a finance bill is a good thing, okay? But why are we waiting for June to demonstrate? Because the issue is not the finance bill here. The issue is debt. The issue is our fiscal framework. This year, and we need to understand as citizens how we come up to the budget and how our fiscal framework works. Let me start by saying this year we had the draft budget policy statement. It came out in February 15th. Then in the draft BPS, the National Treasury had projected to raise 3 trillion as ordinary revenue. Then when there was a call for public participation, I wrote a submission to the National Treasury, and I later wrote to Parliament questioning the revenue number. Why did I have to do this? In the financial year 2020-21, I know you talked about the numbers, but I want us to understand how we get to the debt situation. In the financial year 2020-2021, KRI had targeted to raise 1.5 trillion of ordinary revenue. 1.57, we only raised 1.56, that is 99%. Let me come closer to the financial year 23-24. KRI had targeted to raise 2.4 trillion, but only raised 2.2 trillion. That is 93%. So KRI did not collect 70% of targeted revenue in the financial year 23-24. Then we come to 25-26, we are targeting 3 trillion. So if it took us 4 years, from 2020 to 2020, from 2021 to 23-24, for us to grow our revenue by 46%, how could we grow our revenue by more than 80% within just 1 year? It was unrealistic, and that's how it was revised downward to 2.8 trillion. That's our ordinary revenue target in the financial year 25-26. But now here is the thing. We revised revenue downward, but we did not revise the expenditure side. Okay? So these are some of the things we need to be very active, and that's why I asked, why are we waiting to demonstrate in June? Because it starts way before June, by the time government is giving us the revenue estimates and the expenditure estimates. Because now that gives us the fiscal deficit. Once Parliament approves the fiscal deficit, we give the executive a leg room to borrow. And that's why we had to shift from a debt ceiling to an anchor. Now we are at 11 trillion. Now government has gone to another tactic, working with inflated GDP numbers. Why is this the case? It's because the IMF and other rating agencies use fiscal deficit to GDP as a measure of debt sustainability. So it's simple math. Inflate the denominator for us to have a very small fiscal deficit to GDP. Okay? Now, you asked about the debt, whether it benefits people, and we have this issue about the odious debt. It's a conversation that has been going on. And what is an odious debt? It's an illegitimate debt, debt that you cannot really ascertain whether it benefited the state or not. And how do we get here? Now, in this case, we didn't need everyone on board. We have lawyers here, and I can tell you in our constitution, in the PFM Act, Parliament is not required to ratify loan agreements. It's not required. I remember the time when the former National Treasury CS, Jogona Dongo, was being interviewed. He referred to that issue. But he went silent. Up to date, that conversation is not there. So, and that's why now we end up having the SGR contract that cannot even be disclosed to Parliament. You remember when during the campaign period, the government had said, within our first 3 months, we will disclose the SGR contract. But now when you get to power, you realize there were non-disclosure clauses. So that's how we end up with debt that you cannot ascertain whether it benefited the public or not. So the lawyers in the room, we really need to think about how can the CS be required to seek ratification by disclosing the terms and conditions of loans before signing. Because currently, the CS is only required to report back to Parliament. Once Parliament approves the medium-term debt strategy and the annual borrowing plan, they have no business asking when the CS is borrowing, how much the CS is borrowing, as long as it's within the MTDS and the annual borrowing plan. So we really need to address that. So our debt, as we speak, has really grown, and you know, and that's why, as we speak, 60% of our revenue goes to servicing debt. We are only left with very little to transfer to the counties and to finance our development. Later, I don't want to take time, but the reason I asked, why are we waiting for June for us to demonstrate? You will give me just 5 minutes. I want to demonstrate how the budget has not been working for us. Okay? And I will give you the numbers, the factual numbers from the controller of budget, how, you know, once the budget is approved, you'll be so shocked how through the supplementary budget, money is reallocated from social safety net programs, from WASH programs, from other critical programs, to State House, Office of the President, Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Money is later moved. And that's why I asked, why are we waiting for June to demonstrate? We should be demonstrating because of budget credibility in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Bernard. So what you described there was a situation where you can't trust the figures, right? The government is over-projecting what it's going to take in. It doesn't take it in. It still plans to spend what it hasn't taken in, and on top of it, borrow in order to do those things which it actually doesn't have the money to do. And then once... I mean, the approval of debt is a real problem, because what the parliament does is to approve a debt ceiling, yeah? You're saying the government has not got to go back to Parliament to say this is exactly the kind of debt that we want to take on. And if that's the case, that's because the law was at some point changed, wasn't it? Or it was not properly implemented. The Constitution itself, which we're talking about, the Constitution has a lot of guardrails, has a lot of ways to stop, because this is one of the things that Kenyans really cared about when the Constitution was being passed. And the guardrails which have been introduced in the Constitution, MPs have even collaborated with government in changing some of the sections of the Public Financial Management Act in order to do things with debt which it shouldn't be allowed to do. For example, not bringing debt into the country, not bringing debt into the consolidated fund, etc. Yeah? Is that an accurate reflection of the way things work?
Thank you. I think it's the wording of the Constitution and the PFM Act. And I'm saying this because last year I engaged the Debt and Privatization Committee. There is a training I was doing about public debt management assessment toolkit. And that's the time I also realized that we have those gaps. In the PFM Act and also in the Constitution, because when the PFM Act was amended, they only changed the saving part from a nominal number to an anchor. But the issue of requiring the CS to seek approval before signing loan contracts, that was never there, and it was not even introduced.
Okay, and then, okay, that's one of the issues, and you've talked about odious debt, the fact that the debt is illegitimate because it's not being contracted according to the law, right? Okay, and then you also talk about how the budget is not a budget. They have a budget, and then they have, how many supplementary budgets did we have in this financial year? Was it 2?
We had 2 supplementary budgets. And I remember when, after the withdrawal of the finance bill, you know, citizens were so clear that we don't want to finance offices of the spouses of those in power. And then we had the budget slashed. The budget for Office of the President, Deputy President, and also Prime Cabinet Secretary. But like I have said, you'll be shocked if you see the amount of money that was reallocated to those offices, including State House, through supplementary budget too. Okay,
so let's get this straight. Gen Z goes out on the street, says we don't see what these spouses' offices are for, amongst other things. We don't want them financed. The president takes it, he sort of, quote unquote, rejects the finance bill, which actually isn't in his remit to do, but he did that. And then later on, these spouses' offices are so important to them, so important that the deputy president's wife should have new curtains in her office, that they reject what Gen Z went on the street to say, and they sneak it back in through a supplementary budget. They couldn't even drop completely frivolous expenses. I mean, that speaks to a spirit of impunity. We can't cover all the mischief today, but there's so many other problems. In lack of transparency, you talk about you know, us not knowing what is in the SGR contract. The debt register doesn't give a complete picture of our debt, etc. So there's a lot of mischief, and the more groups like yours do to make Kenyans understand how little these sort of things mean. We talk about a budget, and here we are hearing that yes, they make a budget and then they move figures around, moving them away from your constitutional rights to health, clean water, etc., to move them to things like, you know, an office for the wife of the president, although nobody knows what her job description is. Okay, so that's at least giving us a picture of the sort of rot we're dealing with, of the depth of the problem. Let's move over to Sam. You've worked very, very long on the issue of corruption. What can you tell us about what corruption looks like today in Kenya, and what you think are its main features and the main problems that we're facing?
Thank you, Gladwell, and thanks to the ICJ for the invitation. I think in summary, what I would say is that corruption today is at the highest levels this country has seen. And I think it's fair to say that those that we've entrusted with the responsibility of running our public affairs are primarily concerned with taking away from the public. The issues, Gladwell, you speak about, the social services, are really the least of their worries. And I think while we enacted or we promulgated a constitution that really showed our aspiration to a clean, well-governed society, I think what we've ended up with is first a disempowering of Chapter 6, so that while we knew what it meant when we put it in there, subsequently, the more time passes, it looks like we don't even know what it was all about. And that then created, and that I think was a result of the ICC processes that we were going through. So I think as a way of making sure that the ICC politics do not stand in the way of those who wanted to get into the leadership of this country, we ended up having a very little bar when it comes to leadership qualifications, especially from an ethical integrity perspective for this country. The result is that our resources are being taken away, being stolen, with very little accountability. And while our institutions might work very hard to fight corruption in this country, the political framework, the political environment is such that it's going to be very difficult for our institutions to succeed in their work. So ultimately then, the solution must lie with the people. Thank you.
Exactly. Now you mentioned our institutions. Some of our institutions work very valiantly to protect the people's resources, to implement their mandates. But when I look, for example, at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, I'm not so sure that I would be quite as flattering about them. What have you thought about their performance, especially around the institution of proceedings and then the dropping of proceedings without any, without any convincing justification?
Well, I do think that the issue of dropping prosecutions, instituting and dropping prosecutions is a blot on that office. But I think looking at it from a more longer perspective, the office had really gained some traction when it comes to mounting prosecutions, including of high-profile cases. The problem that we seem to see is the allegations, and I think the political context explains this, because if you recall, before this government came into office, when they were campaigning, they said that the cases that were instituted against mostly their supporters were political. And to the extent that those cases were dropped subsequently, you can conclude two things. One is that they were either political, they might have been right, or secondly, that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions was misguided. And for many Kenyans that I speak to, including my own conclusion, is that there was an element of intimidation, so that these cases were actually dropped because people needed to be free to exercise political power in this country.
And with the result that the belief in the rule of law has been thoroughly undermined, yeah? The confidence of the public in the rule of law.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that issue, because as I sat there earlier listening to the conversation that was going on earlier here, I just came to summarize our problem as simply one of the failure of the rule of law. So that if we were to be looking for a rallying call for us to organize going forward, then reinstating this country to the rule of law is an appropriate rallying call for all of us. So yes, indeed, those cases did undermine significantly the confidence of the Kenyan people in not just the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, but also in the legal system, as it were. Because in that case, even where some institutions objected to those withdrawals, they have not quite succeeded, or rather the judiciary has not seen the merit so far in allowing those cases to continue nonetheless.
Thank you very much, Samuel. So we recently launched a report, which some of you may have seen, on the debt treadmill. And we sort of focused on China's role, but that was only as a first step. We've continued to do further work on the debt problem. And what we found, and we also worked on corruption under the Ruto government, and what we find is that debt and corruption are not two separate issues, yeah? That actually the acquisition of debt for purposes which were not the publicized purposes has come to be also another source of corruption. We all famously remember the Eurobond one, which the government could not account for at least half of, yeah? Yes. Would you and also you, Bernard, agree that there has come to be a sort of union between debt as a field for corruption?
Yes, I agree with you. And going back to where I started, I see that the leaders that we put in place actually are not discharging the constitutional and legal mandates that we've given to them. In essence, the instruments of the state have been captured for very private parochial ends. And therefore, while Kenyans are looking up to their government to be provided services that states would ordinarily provide, what is happening is that those services are being deprioritized. The resources, for example, today, and I think many young people here would agree, that it's actually harder now for young people to go through school. During our time, you just needed to pass your examinations at Form 4, and you would be assured of a loan that would take you through. Right now, that is in jeopardy. The health services that we spoke about, that we very much would want to see provided to everyone, have actually gotten worse with time. So I think the issue of state capture and its purposes is something really to be studied. And I know Gladwell, you and Tim have been working on this for a couple of years now. But it's an important thing to look at, because it basically means that the processes, the legitimate processes that we are talking about here, such as elections, and the outcome of the elections are actually repurposed for very private, narrow interests that are not the public interest. And therefore, the risk of that is what I think Njiri was speaking about here, where you can actually be mortgaged to interest other than our own interest. So that our public interest becomes subservient to other people's interest, because our decision makers want us to be subservient for their own personal or narrow gains.
So we have a facade of a state which goes through the motions of behaving like a state. It purports to do development, although if you look at the budgets, and I think Bernard, you'd agree that when you look at what's being spent on development and what's being spent on just keeping our bureaucrats in office, there's a real problem there. And then we have the rituals of democracy, like elections every 5 years. But like Njiri said before, she feels that we're stuck in a loop, doing the same thing every 5 years and producing the same sort of results. So we're sort of in this sort of imagine playing a reality which has really nothing to do with the real lived reality of Kenyans. And I think Titus, Gitonga, through your work, you might be able to tell us something about the impact on the lived reality of Kenyans of these failed systems and institutions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Gladwell. And I'm very honored to be sitting on the same panel with my former lecturer and mentor, Kimeu. And for Gladwell, I think the work that you did at Transparency International goes down to the villages, because you'll hear a lot of the times when you're at the deepest places in Makueni, that hummingbird thing that you did during your tenure continues to inspire a lot of people there. And so just to clarify on the Deputy Chief of Party, it's not a common name. That was, I've shelved that. That was under the USAID situation, but now we've transitioned. I'm supporting Transparency International Kenya on their public finance management work. Yeah, so my personal experience, maybe just to share on what I would refer to as budgeted corruption, is where we have instances of cosmetic public participation processes in situations where people within the system have already identified opportunities for corruption. So one time I actually participated in a public participation meeting that was in Kangemi. It was back in 2019. And there was a proposal for fish ponds that was taking quite a bit of resources. And everyone was like, how do we have this proposal within this budget? First of all, we had it in the last budget. We've not, there was no information on how much had been achieved, who are the beneficiaries, how is that a priority within Nairobi County, and all that. So you could see the agitation of the citizens in trying to figure out what would fish ponds be budgeted for within the budget, and it's not something that is, we can see the beneficiaries or anything. So there is a bit more interest in us being very keen on what goes into our budgets. We also saw, we have seen so many times within the parliamentary processes. One time the impeached governor of Kiambu, Kiambu, you've gone through a lot, eh? Yeah. So we've had, you had him just trying to answer questions about a county budget having budget lines on an embassy in South Sudan or intervening. So it was quite surprising that you get, nobody understands this budget, and yet we are trying to say that we are following. So there's a bit of camouflage. The documents that we interact with sometimes do not have very correct data in terms of what is the actual information that is in those budgets. But a lot of the institutions that are brought out a lot of these things is very two critical institutions. The control of budget, and they're described in the constitution as the two only independent offices, the controller of budget and the office of the auditor general. And there is a reason to why those offices are described in the manner in which they are described as independent offices, and why they are very important in you getting the actual information on the impact of the budgets that have been passed. And the extent to which a lot of these reports have brought out people trying to find out, okay, you have talked about the figures. The Office of the Auditor General brings out a lot of figures on mismanagement or pending projects. But we've seen citizens through, I don't know how many of you follow the Vampire Diaries? Yeah? Awesome, yeah. Those who know, if you know, you know, yeah? So Vampire Diaries is citizens going out to show the actual situation of the figures that have been brought out in the audit reports. What is the actual situation on the ground, and what has been the impact of those failed programs that have not been funded or that have resulted in there not being services. And I think a lot of these, we also experienced it during the COVID period. If a lot of us just followed what was happening during that period, you found companies that had been incorporated just 2 months right after the announcement of COVID, benefiting from multi-billion or million Kenya shilling contracts. So there is a lot of work that is required to go behind the veil to understand who are these people who are benefiting from the budget items, and uncovering the extent to which this wastage has affected people. Like if you went to Aror and Kimeu, where there were supposed to be dams, what has been the impact of the failed programs because of corruption in that community, and trying to juxtapose that so that citizens can go beyond getting the figure of 2 billion a day being lost to corruption to actually seeing the impact it has to our lives. And that is how the youth are getting very agitated when you cannot have what Dr. Waindi was saying, that they used to be paid to go to campus, and you'll go home with shopping. That is not something that any of us experienced when we're in campus, and it's even now worse for those who are in campus at the moment. So a lot of us have those lived experiences, and we need to continue shining a spotlight on the impact that it has to citizens.
Thank you very much. That goes directly to what was said in the previous panel about the importance of knowledge, the importance of information, and unpacking things so that the people can be made to understand the real impact on them. Because when you say things like 2 billion shillings, I remember in the past when we've gone to the public and said, oh, they took so and so many billion shillings from you, and that would be enough to fund free primary education for this and this period, and it doesn't have the impact that you think it would. And I think, you know, the more people become aware that the cost that they're paying is in health foregone, in maternity services foregone, in infant mortality that rises, etc., the more that we'll really be able to mobilize people, and not just, as we said before, it won't just be a Gen Z thing, but Gen Zote thing. So I'd like now to come to Michael Mburu, and we touched on some of the experiences you had in Kiambu, but I'd like to hear what you think some of the things you've done that have been successful in terms of fighting against some of these problems.
Thank you, Gladwell. And before I say anything, let me first give you your flowers while you are still
Plenty
here.
of flowers today, it's fine.
And our seniors in this space, including Mr. Kimeu and the others, because the work that you have done over the years in expanding the civic space has really been an inspiration to these young people who are seated in this room today. People who believe that through their action and dedication, they are able to salvage a country where people are filled with fear, where people feel like it is too risky to talk truth to power. So for that, just know that we appreciate the work that you people have done, and continue mentoring us, continue showing us the way, because there is a lot to learn from the work that you have been doing. On the issue of debt, because it is closely related to corruption, and I'm very happy because in our panel we have the expert of the numbers, and he has really broken down the numbers. But when we go to the community, at the grassroots, because I come from an organization called Bunge Mashinani, and Bunge Mashinani means a village. And it is villagers who live in a village. So I am one of those villagers. And you can tell a villager from how he dresses when he comes to Nairobi. So we want to try and break down these numbers into what our young people, our parents back in the village, those that did not make it beyond class 8 or form 4 can actually understand. And when we talk about a debt of 11.2 trillion, you know, we joked with we have been joking with these numbers until we lost sensitivity of what a trillion is. But when you go to the village and you tell people that if I were to come to you every single day and give you 1 million shillings every single day, Monday to Sunday, whether it is a holiday or whether every single day, the 365 days, I would do that for 2,740 years for me to give you 1 trillion. Now people start asking you, now you are saying we have times 11 of that in terms of debt. Now it starts sinking how deeply in shit we are with public debt. And when you look at these numbers, you start realizing that with that number, we are saying that every one of us in this country, including the child who is born today, we owe 169,000. And some of the Gen Zs are saying even their net worth is not that much. It starts sinking deeper. That all of us owe 169,000, each one of us. We also break it down that the debt repayment is 70 shillings for every 100 bob that we have as a country. And the question we ask in our engagements to our villagers is, who would run even their home with a budget of 30% and 70% you are paying debts? How sustainable is that? When you bring it into that context, people start understanding that we are only left with 30 shillings to cater for our development as a country, to run our country, out of every 100 shilling that we have. These 30 shillings is what will pay for our healthcare, is what will pay for our development, is what will pay for our education, for everything that we need as a country. And so now conversations start now becoming, then how can we really run a country with 30% of what we are collecting or what we have? And the impacts, because we want to connect that 11.2 trillion to how it is affecting you as a person. That is why the students are suffering with the new university model. That is why you go to hospital and you will not find drugs. That is why our roads are in tatters. And so the people will now start to understand this big animal in the room called public debt. So what do we propose, or what do we tell them that we need to do about this debt? We are running a campaign that if it is not our debt, we cannot pay it. And it is simple as sometimes when we are too academic, ukienda village unakaa like a villager, you tell villagers what they want to hear. That indeed, if it is somebody who took that debt, it was not used for development as the PFM Act says, then somebody should be accountable for that debt, and not you and me. But if that debt went to the right use, then as a country we need to pay that debt. So if we do not have a debt register in this country, I even know there is a court order directed at the CS for finance to disclose the debt register in this country, and no one is giving that debt register, then it is only fair as Kenyans that is not our debt. So the avenues that we use to do this, because for us we are very much focused at the grassroots, is we have been really inspired by the Gen Z movement and how they were able to message. And one of the things they used was music. Music is one language that is universal. Language is one language that brings all generations together. So we have utilized street concerts where we just go get a very good music system. We go to the streets and it is a music. And within segments of 10 minutes within that music, we tell the people about these things. We tell the young people why it is so important to interact with this information and know that you need to go and get your voter's ID to go and vote on issues that relate to what we are saying. The number 2 thing, Gladwell, that we do is community roundtables. You've heard someone from Bunge Mashinani School of Governance. We have made it intentional that we need to educate people about budget processes. They need to know what is the role of citizens in bringing these changes and in being in these conversations. And these are things we hope and believe that in partnership with community media stations who have proven to be such a key ally in this, that we can be able to drive these conversations. We cannot relent and we cannot afford to drop the ball. That is what we are doing in our own small way to make sure that these conversations are going on in the communities.
Thank you so much. As you see, he's a real people's educator. He broke down the issues for us. We can't cover really, we can't do the subject justice in this small panel, but I think we could, you know, perhaps now allow the participants to ask questions, make comments, and then we can respond. And if there's anything you'd like to pick up that you didn't before, then you can do it when we come back, yeah? Okay, we'll start with the young lady here, and that gentleman in the corner had his hand up. I've got two of you. Let's take these two first. And then you. I'm sorry, and Tjan. That's four. I think that's all we can do because it's really, the time has really moved on.
Thank you very much. I'm Wanjiko Michelle from Bunge Mashinani. So my first question is, what are the grounds of swaying on odious debt? Because on the 26th of April, Okia Omtata filed a case, then withdrew it, and days later, he filed it again. So what are the grounds of filing for odious debt? Then why are they called public debt, yet there was no public participation that was done for them to be called public debt? And number three, why China? Why do we run to China? Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Before I go to the next one, I want to make it clear, we weren't saying that China is more evil than anybody else. We just chose, they're pretty much like other debtors and even follow the conditions of other debtors. But their debts are very interesting because they don't pretend like the Western countries do to care about transparency, etc. But just making that note, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Jacob, an LLB student in the University of Nairobi. My question specifically goes to Mr. Bernard Njiri and probably Mr. Michael Mburu. And by the way, before I proceed, Mr. Bernard, I'm very glad to have been selected in your this year's bootcamp program. So I'm looking forward to learn more on taxation and on that particular topic. So there is something here that I'm actually struggling to understand. And I would want you to probably simplify it for me. So President Moi, in 24 years, left us a debt of 6 billion Kenyan shillings. And so he passed it to President Mwai Kibaki. And then Mwai Kibaki, in 10 years, pushed that debt to about 1 trillion or 1.1 trillion thereabout. And then in 10 years, President Uhuru Kenyatta pushed it to 8.5 trillion. And then President Ruto, in 3 years or 2 years, he has been able to push that particular debt from 8.5 to 11 trillion. So, and you did mention that we are spending 70% of our revenue collection to service our debt. So if this is the case, why are these figures not reducing? Just try to simplify it for me.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, if the other two questions could be quite brief. There was the gentleman in the gray suit at the back, and then Tjan. And I've got someone who's got their hand very high, so you all have to promise to be really, really brief, because that's all we can take. Okay, starting with... oh, you...
I already have the mic.
Now, is that the way to behave? We talked about modeling the kind of behavior we want. Yes, be the change you want to be.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
My question is to Mr. Kimeu, whom I first heard about when I was in the university, of your passion and power for accountability actions, and all the experts there. My request is, or question is, how do we take advantage of your expertise to make the question of accountability and transparency an agenda for the Gen Z action? And the other thing is that it seems that the Kimeu that I knew in TI and the transparency movement and the Gladwell that I knew, how do we harness this expertise and knowledge to build other new Kimeus and Gladwell and build a serious anti-corruption movement? That used to be my dream. I lack the mentors. Thank you.
Great. Tjan?
Hi everyone, my name is Tjan Casilu. My question is very simple. Not too long ago, Ghana went through a financial crisis, right? And there was a term that was thrown around a lot, which was a haircut. So my question is, could you explain, it's kind of compartmentalized, but could you explain what a haircut is? And in the case of Kenya, how far away are we from the haircut? Yeah, I think my question is a bit pessimistic, but I feel it might be necessary to start preparing or to at least see what the worst case scenario could look like. Thanks.
Good. And now the gentleman who had the mic no longer has it and is now getting it back.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kawoku Paul. I just moved here because the pillar was obscuring my view. So I have two quick ones. So number one, because we've been talking about, reclaiming our political space. Assume we do away with the Ruto regime and we have now the Gen Zs in power. What are the implications if we decide, we are not going to pay the odious debt? So what would be the implications of that? Then two is, I was just thinking, why do we go for loans, in China, IMF and all? Assume we just bring all the commercial banks in Kenya on the table and we ask them, would you give us money? Okay, we intend to construct this road. It's going to cost us this much money. So are you willing to loan us, X amount of money? And then, we'll be paying you maybe through a fuel levy and stuff like that. Is that something viable? Thank you.
So we ended up with quite a lot of questions for Bernard, but please, were there any questions directed to you, Sam? Yes, there were, a couple, sorry.
Thank you. One, Okiya Mtata has moved to court to challenge our debt, and it's a good process because it's a legal process, and the reason I support that is because you cannot separate debt from corruption, and we witnessed that in Mozambique when we had the tuna board scandal. Then it was established that the creditor had bribed with more than 1 million USD to get a contract to develop the fishing industry in Mozambique. When that was established through a court process, now Mozambique is not required to repay that debt. So if it can be established through a court process that we have odious debt in Kenya, that's the only way Kenya can fail to pay that debt. Otherwise, if it's not established and Kenya refuses to pay, it's a litigation process even to international courts. And what that will translate into is some of our state assets, like aeroplanes, will be captured. When they ride to another country, like it happened last year in Nigeria, they had a Chinese debt, and then one of the airplanes was detained. So that's what happens. You have to repay debt. So unless now it has been established through a court process, because government is a going concern. Whether it was borrowed by Kibaki and now it's Ruto in power, we have to pay that because it's an obligation, and it comes as a first charge. We have what we call the Consolidated Fund Service, CFS. Debt is treated as a first charge. So before we pay salaries, before we pay anything else, the country has to pay debt first. That's why it's a concern, and that's why every time we have revenue shortfalls and we have to pay debt first, we have to delay disbursing money to the counties. That's why we have that cry from the counties, the governors threatening to shut down operations at the county. So when that happens, just know there is a woman in labor who will deliver on the floor. That's the sad reality. There is a person in dire need of ambulance services who will not access the ambulance services. You see. So that's the implication of debt on service delivery, on the common citizen. What a haircut means is that you have to fit into the IMF straight jacket. It's already cut. So you are forced to go the fiscal consolidation route, and you have to comply with conditionalities that come with that come from the Bretton Woods institutions. Then there was that question how our debt has grown from 6 billion to 11 trillion now. Why are the debt numbers not reducing? Let me give an example that we can relate. In 2013-14, we went to borrow a Eurobond. Okay, we borrowed at 6.3, they're about 6.3% interest. 10 years down the line, Kenya could not repay that Eurobond. That is why last year in February, we had to go back to the market and roll over that debt. What does that mean? We are refinancing the Eurobond by going back to the market to borrow. Are we together? So we went back to the market again to borrow, to repay. So we have just kicked the can down the road. So that's why our debt stock is not reducing, because we are borrowing to repay. That's why it's not reducing. Then the other question was about why are we going to China? I think it's because of their approval process, because that's a bilateral loan. And it does not come with as many conditions as the loans you contract with the IMF. China is, and China is not the worst creditor, for your information. And our debt, if you take the percentage of our debt, the Chinese debt as a percentage of our total debt, actually it's below 1%. So we don't owe that much to China as it has been publicized. So that's why it's good we have some of these numbers. And numbers are so critical because, when we make noise out here and then you are called to the negotiation table or to the table where policies are made, then you are told, now we heard you from out there. Now tell us. Okay? Now that's when you start losing your power if you are acting out of emotions. But if you have the right numbers, government will always listen at what you are saying. Grounds for then the last one about Okia Omtata. I think Okia Omtata is going to court because there has been a lot of opaqueness around the contracting and use of public debt. And that creates every reason to believe that we have odious debt. And what confirms that? I remember the president wanted to form a task force to audit our debt, right? And then it was challenged in court. So what I would say is that if it walks like a duck, then it is. So by the virtue of the president agreeing to form a task force to audit debt, then it's an indication there is a problem with our debt register. So thank you. And one participant talked about the PFM boot camp. Yes, it's a program that we run as the Institute of Public Finance, because we realized we have been leaving university students from the public finance management conversations, and that's why every year we take students from 16 universities, we enroll them to a PFM course for 1 year, and then we train them, because we really need to push this information, this analysis, to our final year university students, so because they are future leaders, they will help us to get this information from our rooms, our boardrooms, to Mashinani. Thank you.
Yes, I think I can now come up and just compliment what Bernard has said. I think on the issue of how our debt has grown, one of the issues that Bernard has not touched on is the budget deficit. And I think the easiest way to explain it is for you to assume that you earn 100 shillings. You earn 100 shillings, but you are spending more than 100 shillings. So it means that you are spending more than you are earning, which means what is on top is borrowed. What you borrow as interest that you have to repay. And so as you continue borrowing more, if you are perpetually in deficit and you continue to borrow, it will get to a point where all that you earn, your 100 shilling, goes to pay debt. And you have nothing left to do anything else but to continue borrowing. So you get into a vicious cycle of borrowing. That's the simplest way I would explain it. And I think I remember one time this question being asked of a senior treasury official when Kenyans started complaining that the government was broke and government was overspending and overborrowing. He said that government does not get broke. Government makes money when you are asleep. Which is true, but I think he's retired now. I hope today he can be put to question around that, because I think he was misleading Kenyans. Government does not have an inexhaustible amount of money to spend. I think the other question was why do we borrow? Why can't we borrow from our banks? The truth is that we borrow from our banks through the treasury bonds and government papers. Government also borrows from you and me through the same mechanism. So we are actually borrowing, but what we have is not sufficient to meet our needs. So we go out there to borrow from those who can afford to give us some credit. But I thought a bit of context about the Chinese, and perhaps why the Chinese debt has gotten a bit of a bad name in this country, is because much of its debt was contracted when we had a change of government around 2013. And if you remember, the political context then was that it was quite difficult to borrow externally and from the Western bilaterals as well as the multilaterals. And so the Chinese debt was quite easy because there are usually no questions asked as of that time. So it was quite easy. If you remember, we were all talking about leaning east. That was a phrase that was used across many parts of Africa. But also I think the other bit to say is that we started borrowing at commercial rates, which are quite higher than we would actually get from the multilateral lenders. And I think that's also partly the challenge we have today. So we contracted quite a bit of commercial debt that exacted pressure on our ability to repay. And I think for my friend, how you can use our expertise, we are here, this is our country. We spend our time speaking to young people, and so we would be happy, personally I would be happy to be invited to share my wisdom and my ideas on how we can get our country back. Yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah.
Michael,
Just to add on to what the two experts have talked about why we are in this cycle of growing debt. I think from a citizen's perspective, and talking of numbers, when a president on national TV tells you that we are losing 2 billion every day to corruption, then that's not a statistic that we can just wish away. So we feel that corruption is a very big factor in terms of why we are not being able to reservice our debts, why there's a lot of public waste. And from a citizen perspective, we feel that having a discourse on anti-corruption and fighting against corruption from a citizens-based approach would be something that can actually talk to our debt crisis.
Yeah, maybe just to add on something that had been touched on before on the issue of withdrawal of cases and how we can get resources from the corrupt practices to pay back the debt is through asset recovery from those who have been involved in corruption cases. And why it is very concerning when the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, for instance, starts withdrawing cases in a manner in which we can see it is politically aligned, it just shows you, and the reports from the EACC can tell you, before 2022, the withdrawal of cases was like 3 cases, you couldn't, but an analysis of the cases that have been withdrawn from 2022, the year 2022 to 2023, the value of the amount of money that was being contested in those cases was 1.7 billion shillings. Just for that period, just right after the election and in 2023. Then those were about 9 cases. Right now, 2023, 2024, we've had cases withdrawn up to it's like 700 million or thereabout. And again, it's almost 7 cases. But before this period, there were very, very minimal number of cases, and therefore it is very concerning when we see that cases that have, and if you just had talk with EACC and see the amount of resources that are put to investigating just one corruption case, it is immense. And we are also speaking about how do we ensure that we resource the oversight institutions adequately to be able to ensure that there is proper audit of some of these. And right now, I'm hoping a lot of us have participated in the Public Audit Amendment Act, where we are trying to also see towards how can, at least if it's 1% or 2% of every public entity's budget be secured for purposes of audit, because the Office of the Auditor General has consistently said that they do not have adequate resources to look at the resources that have been used. So that would be one way of trying to address the gap from the citizen, from the audit issues, but also as citizens, let's continue documenting, doing lifestyle audits by ourselves of these people, profiling them. That information at one point or another may be useful to recover some of the resources that have been lost to corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We've gone over time. It's impossible to really have an exhaustive discussion about these things. There are very many unanswered questions or not completely answered questions left hanging in the room. As somebody else said, read, educate yourself. The information is available. Where available? That young man who wanted to know whether we're prepared to go out there and talk to people, please feel free to talk to us. I don't think it will be valuable now to try and cover anything else. I just want to thank the panelists, and I think the conclusion here is that corruption and debt have reached such levels that the Kenya is in an existential crisis. That crisis will not come in 2027. It is now. It is happening right now as we speak. And we've come to the point where we can no longer allow corruption to just keep on, and the politicians to do their stratagems and their fake coalitions and then come out with some new manifesto and some new name and try and fool the electorate yet again. I think that the potential that Gen Z has is to really rewrite those rules of the game and say, why should we wait until 2027? Indeed, as Bernard was asking, why do we wait? Although we know the budget cycle, why are we waiting until June to do something about it? But at any rate, the information is there, and people are planning and they're acting, and we look forward to continued activity around this and hopefully some measure of success in the near future. Thank you very much.